The unfair matches in Roman Colosseums to the most brutal, which is just a list of two not good things mashed into one thing. It's normally like a good thing leading to a bad thing, or least bad to worst bad, but this is just bad all around. Now, the Roman Colosseum is known for having some of the most wild fantasies when it comes to gladiator battles, but like also some of those fantastic facts like billboards or merch or, or Roman gladiator prostitution or sweat selling. Some things that are totally believable, and then other things like flooding the Colosseum for naval battles, which probably didn't happen, but maybe they did, and that's awesome to think about. I heard Gladiator 2 is finally getting a reboot. Actually one of my favorite movies ever made, if not my favorite movie ever made. And I'm down to watch it just based off namesake. All right, let's get into it.
Let's start with the unfair and slowly work our way towards the most brutal matchups on the list.
Yeah, the
Number
bad
10,
to bad.
blind fighters. And Abadia were criminals who would be forced to fight completely blind. They would be given a straight sword and a helmet for protection.
Okay.
Except the helmet was practically a curse, since it was completely sealed off, preventing the fighter from seeing or hearing anything. The fight would begin as soon as the fighters were placed within close range of one another, with the most popular strategy being the swing and pray method, which in all honesty was the only strategy available. Now, the good news is that judges weren't really needed for these fights, since the winners were very easy to identify, as they were the only contestants still breathing. Now, the crazy part is that this spectacle was seen as comedic relief more than anything. And if you don't think two blind men fighting each other to the death is hilarious, well, you have a lot to learn about comedy. Now, this might not sound that unfair at first, since both men are equally blind and equipped with the same weapon. But think again, since the winner of the match would typically be rewarded with another match.
Oh,
and another one.
That's
and another
messed
one.
up.
And another one. You get the point. As you can imagine, a winning streak never really lasted for very long. Number 9.
Okay, so you definitely would have had more strategies, because the second I hear we're doing blind death matches, I'm adapting the lay and spray method. That shit works in Call of Duty. Dolphin diving works there, would definitely work here. You telling me there's not a guy that would run backwards and just trace the whole thing until he finds somebody? Because the windmill method's got to get tired after a while. Also, if you found like a rock or something you could throw, distract them, like in the movies, that shit would be hella useful. I'm just saying, dude. I feel like, it's like we have noise-canceling headphones now, and it blew people's minds with how noise-canceling they were, right? And so I think that proves their noise-canceling wouldn't have been 100% proof. That's all I'm trying to say. We could hear something out there.
Naval Battles. There was nothing more epic than the naval battles of the Colosseum. Also, one of the most unfair, bloody, and expensive. The event would begin by filling the Colosseum with water in around a dozen ships. It's estimated that thousands of prisoners would participate in these events. But let's talk about what made these battles unfair. Now, depending on the starting position of your ship, it could determine your likelihood of survival. Well, at least for a bit longer, as the odds of survival were almost non-existent to begin with. Ships that started in between two other ships would make for an easy target, easily creating a 1v2 scenario. Prisoners would invade other ships, killing everyone that stood in their way, while others would simply use the more popular strategy we see today, which is, of course, running away from all fights and sneaking their way to the final round, where they can hope to steal the win with a single kill. The bloody fight would come to an end when there was only one ship or team remaining. As terrible as these battles were, at least they were easy to clean up. The Romans would try their best to remove all the large debris from the water, before the stadium would be flushed like a giant toilet bowl, sending all the remains downstream for another town to deal with. Number 8.
Now, I thought that the naval battles, if they were real, were used to commemorate victories that Rome had. So I thought they were just completely set up for one team to fail, like shitty boats, and then the great Roman Navy comes in and wipes them out or whatever.
Number 8. Gladiator fights. Gladiator fights were the single most popular matches of the Colosseum, with the good matchups typically being saved for the main event. Now, how can two gladiators fighting each other be unfair, you might ask? Well, for starters, the emperors weren't really interested in fairness, as their primary concern was entertainment. And with over 20 different classes of gladiators to choose from, the styles would be mixed and matched based on entertainment alone.
Skizzer!
Here are some of the most unfair and popular matchups. Retiarius versus Secutor.
Yeah,
Retiarius were equipped with a net, a trident, a dagger, and minimal armor, while the Secutor was equipped with a sword, a large shield, a helmet, and heavy armor. Go ahead, pick one.
The net.
If you chose the Secutor, well, GG's, you're dead.
You're dead.
As the Retiarius just had to keep his distance and poke at the Secutor.
Bro, they would do work. They would go in. You ever been poked with a pokey stick repeatedly while you're tired in your hot-ass armor? You are today, son. You are today.
Or better yet, trap him by throwing his net on him, giving him enough time to emote before poking him to death.
Right. The spear is OP, bro. Like, it seems like the straight sword is probably the most popular thing to put in an army. But if you equip an army with spears, you're going to have great success. Light armor, heavy armor, horseback, you can throw it, you can pick your teeth with it, you can cut a good steak. I'm trying to sell it to you as it works.
Another one, Merillo versus Thorax.
Ooh.
Merillo were armed with a large rectangular shield, a short sword, a helmet, and a metal or leather sleeve for protection, while the Thorax was equipped with a light shield, a curved sword, a helmet, and a metal or leather sleeve for protection. Go ahead, pick one.
Okay, I'm going to go with the curved sword because it's cool.
If you chose the Merillo, rip, you're dead. As the Thorax just had to tire out the Merillo since he was carrying the heavier shield.
Overrated.
As you can see, stylistic matchups were a big deal and could easily influence the outcome of a fight. And I know this might come as a shock to some, but not all Gladiator fights were to the death. A lot of fights would be called off when a fighter took heavy damage, since good gladiators were very expensive to replace. Number 7.
And of course, this is all conjecture. Like, we know that might not be totally accurate. I did do a reaction once of like a super interesting video that broke down all like the gladiator types and like training regiments, but it was like an hour long and like nobody watched it. But if you want to go back to something like that, I'm totally down. Totally down.
Animal battles. Humans were not the only ones to have unfair matchups inside of the Colosseum, since animals were also treated like criminals. They would be enslaved, pinned against each other, and humiliated, and were such a popular spectacle that at times, thousands of animals would be slaughtered in a given day, which was completely unsustainable, driving many animals to extinction. Here are some of the most popular and unfair matchups that were commonly seen in the Colosseum. Elephant versus rhino. One of the most famous Colosseum battles was when an enraged rhino was pinned against an elephant, with the elephant eventually winning when he decided to cheat by grabbing a spear with its trunk and gouging the rhino's eyes out. Lion versus tiger. This matchup is basically a robbery, as I'm sure the locals would have bet large amounts of money against the guys from out of town, since they knew that the lion always wins, with there only being one recorded incident of a tiger getting the best of a lion. Elephant versus bull. As you can imagine, when an animal has over 10,000 pounds on its opponent, it's not really going to be much of a fight, is it? But just to make matters worse, sometimes the elephant and the bull would be chained together, forcing the action.
Hilarious.
And no matter how the fight begins, it would always end with the bull being turned to soup. Really quickly, here are some of the other animal fights that were very popular. Rhino versus bear, rhino versus buffalo, rhino versus elephant, crocodile versus hippo, tiger versus bear versus bull, bear versus wolves, goro versus scorpion, lion versus bull, lion versus bear, lion versus panther, lion versus chimp, lion versus hyenas, lion versus basically any animal the Romans can get a hold of. Number 6, 1 versus 2. This matchup can be unfair for either side depending on the circumstances. Let me explain. There are 2 scenarios in which this matchup can take shape.
Do one have a horse?
A high-level gladiator will take on 2 prisoners simultaneously. And as the prisoners try their best to figure out how to properly hold a sword, they will realize that it's very difficult to do so, since their hands are no longer attached. Now, the second scenario is a bit more fair. 3 well-trained gladiators were placed inside of the Colosseum. One gladiator would be given heavy armor and a good weapon, while his 2 opponents would receive minimal armor and worse weapons. The duo would need to work together to defeat the better-equipped man. But being partnered up is not as easy as you might think, and does come with its own set of challenges, like knowing whether you should go for the res or attempt to clutch up when your partner inevitably goes down. The last and final way that a gladiator can be outnumbered is during large-scale battles. This one is, of course, purely based on luck alone, and doesn't always mean that you will see a 1v2 matchup, as it just might be a 1v6 depending on how bad your team is.
Jump you,
Number 5, woman versus dwarf. Emperor Domitian introduced the legendary matchup, Woman versus Dwarf. And I have to admit, this is the only battle on the list where a clear winner was not well documented. But even with the little information we do have, I have a gut feeling that it just wasn't a fair matchup. I'm just not certain for whom.
Yeah.
You see, on one hand, you have a fully grown woman who obviously has the reach advantage. While on the other hand, you have a male dwarf who is much stronger and obviously uses magic. How much stronger? Well, I'm not sure. I did, however, stumble upon this forum where a guy asked the same question back in 2011. Now, sadly, people just replied back with even more interesting questions that we will never get the answers to. And of course, naturally, the entire forum devolved into guys just bragging about how many dwarves they can take on at once. One of the most bizarre things about this matchup was that Emperor Domitian liked to schedule this fight at night, since he preferred this battle when it was illuminated by torchlights. In 2010, a female gladiator's remains were found in England. After they were examined, it was concluded that the woman's legs and arm bones were unusually heavy, suggesting that she had strong muscles. You know, I was originally leaning towards the dwarf, but now I really don't see how they could possibly win. Number 4. Wild animal hunts.
That was a weird one.
Perhaps one of the most unique spectacles of the Colosseum was the wild animal hunts. Here, the entire Colosseum arena was made to resemble the animal's natural environment. A few men were then brought out to the arena equipped with small shields and weapons. Then for the next few minutes or hours, the arena would be slowly filled with terrifying predators. But if they really wanted to get the crowd on their feet, all the animals would be released at once.
Yeah.
Sometimes the men who were fighting the lions, bears, and panthers would have been well-trained fighters, while other times they would have been condemned criminals who were just given the death sentence and stood 0 to no chance of winning. Here are some of the animals you could have expected to make an appearance.
Hyena?
Lions, tigers, bears, elephants, rhinos, panthers, leopards, hyenas, wolves, boars, bulls, deers, ostriches, crocodiles, giraffes, camels, and shipwrecks. Of course, shipwrecks were not invited, but they showed up anyways. Number 3. Man.
All right, we're nearing the end quickly here.
Versus beast. Man versus beast matches were one-on-one battles and were the second most popular spectacle, only behind gladiator fights. Now, there were basically 2 ways that this matchup would be arranged, with both of them tailored for maximum entertainment for the crowd. The first one was when a professional slave or volunteer fighter known as a bestiarius would face off with a terrifying beast. The animal could be anything from a lion, leopard, tiger, bear, or any other large and powerful creature. These battles would typically end with the animal being defeated, even if the bestiarius took heavy damage. On the other hand, the second matchup was much more bloody and typically ended with the man being torn to pieces. Here, a criminal or prisoner of war would be forced to face off with the animal. With little to no training, it was only a matter of time before the man would become an anatomy lesson. And it definitely didn't help that the animals were starved for long periods of time before they were brought out, making them a lot more angry and aggressive. There was even a single lion that took out over 200 men before it was finally defeated.
Yeah, bro. You get a lion ready to eat some people, dog. There's very little you're going to do about it if he's ready to go.
Which is obviously a padded record, since it clearly fought nothing but tomato cans. Oh, I should also mention, there is another event that was very popular and is somewhat related, where a criminal was tied to a stake and then a wild animal would be released to eat him alive.
Yeah.
You know, you would think that this would be one of those situations where if you've seen it once, then you've seen them all type of deal. But apparently, some emperors love to show this one quite often. Number 2. Prisoner versus professional gladiator. Easily one of the most unfair matchups of the Colosseum was when prisoners would face off against a professional and seasoned gladiator. The professional gladiator could have been a slave himself with many fights under his belt, or a volunteer gladiator that was part of one of the many gladiatorial schools. Either way, the criminal with 0 to no experience was basically sentenced to death. You see, what could be worse than being invaded, enslaved, and kept inside of a cell for days, just to be given a weapon you have never used, then pushed to the center of the Colosseum floor, only for Spartacus to make his walkout shortly after you.
Yeah. And he a real killer too. Like, he chopped people up. It ain't like you going out there like a boxer and you're just gonna get knocked out. Like, bro, he's gonna start cutting digits off. And sword fighting, like, at least in a fist fight, I see people bad at fist fighting. They do like the, these moves or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, just throwing the hands out there and turning the head away, which is terrible fighting things to do. But it is hard to beat somebody up that is just running away from you. Like, running away is a tactic in fighting. Bro, you turn your back on a sword and throw your hands like this, the hands coming off. The hands are coming with it. Just saying.
1. Rigged fights. What could be more unfair than rigged matches? Emperor Commodus was definitely the worst offender when it came to rigged matches.
That's definitely
the emperor ruled Rome from 180 to 192 AD and was even portrayed by Joaquin Phoenix in the 2000 film Gladiator. Commodus was obsessed with becoming a famous and well-respected gladiator, so much so that he would even compete himself. Well, if you could even call it that. An emperor fighting as a gladiator was unheard of. Now, of course, Commodus had the best training in all of Rome and was actually very talented with the sword. But that wouldn't stop him from rigging fights by secretly injuring men just moments before they were brought out to face him. His opponents were injured in a way that could be concealed under their armor, but be devastating enough to hinder their performance or make a limb unusable.
Which you've seen that in the movie. They portrayed that very, very well in the movie.
Another strategy that the emperor would use was simply fighting men with 0 to no experience, making for another easy W. Emperor Commodus would have the longest undefeated record as a gladiator, and it's suspected that he competed hundreds of times. He would also charge the Roman treasury around 25,000 pieces of silver every time he competed. There are many things you could call Emperor Commodus, but one thing you can't say is that he ever discriminated.
Okay.
Since animals were also injured and thrown in to face him.
Ha!
Apparently, he killed hundreds of lions, ostriches, some giraffes, and on one occasion, even killed 3 elephants that were just laying on the floor. Now, as horrible as this all sounds, this was all just a warm-up. And in November of 192 AD, he held the Polybian Games, a festival that lasted around 2 weeks. There, Commodus shot hundreds of animals with arrows and javelins every single day.
Wow.
But if it makes you feel any better, 1 month after the Polybian Games, Commodus would be strangled to death inside of his bathtub by a professional wrestler named Narcissus. Which, for a man, that has to be the most embarrassing way to be found dead. Completely naked inside of a cold tub. You can't even explain your way out of that one.
I mean, you're dead, so you're not explaining much anyways. That was very enjoyable for me. Now, I don't know about all this. I feel like some of these things are just like, you skim through it, and that's what they told you, and then you told us, and I have proof. But I feel like a lot of research shows that a lot of this stuff is probably not that accurate, but this is for entertainment purposes anyways. Don't worry about it too much. Again, if you guys are interested in some more actual details of it, I do know of a couple videos that go into great depth about the different gladiator types and all that. So I would be more than happy to do that vid. In the meantime, I'll holler at you guys. Peace.